Hello now, it is time for our newspaper review. Ben joins us.
Yeah, let's take a look at stories making headlines from around the world.
And firstly, President Trump's condemnation of far-right groups takes the front page of the Financial Times, but it came after criticism from business leaders. Now, the article in the FT highlights that Trump waited a whole 48 hours to denounce white supremacist groups, and not before lashing out on Twitter about a resignation within the president's manufacturing council.
In the Japan Times, the story about the country's economy growing at its fastest rate in more than 2 years for the second quarter of the year. Consumer spending and capital expenditure also showing the strongest growth figures in 3 years. The question is, will the pace continue heading towards the 2020 Olympics?
The New York Times has a feature on London's Grenfell Tower today under the headline, "Fire Reveals a Double Standard." The piece draws the contrast between the affluence of South Kensington against those in North Kensington, of course home to some of Britain's poorest, and where now a blackened shell of public housing stands.
In The Guardian, is Uber trying to extend an olive branch to its drivers by allowing them to receive tips and also charge when they have to wait for passengers? The article says the move is an attempt to take the sting out of a long-running dispute with drivers over labour rights.
And Big Ben to fall silent for 4 years. The Daily Telegraph looks at the backlash. Now, some MPs have protested that the chimes will be out of action for too long. The reason is to protect the eardrums of workmen renovating the icon. And I tell you what, that's had a lot of backlash. Let's begin.
Yeah, I know. No one likes it when a Ben falls silent, do they?
I'm not even going to say anything. Maike Currie, Investment Director at Fidelity Personal Investing, joins us. It's wonderful to see you this morning.
Morning.
Before we move on to Big Ben falling silent, let's start with our top story. Of course, the condemnation that Trump has finally given to what happened in Charlottesville. It took him 48 hours, and he does it, but he still lashes out at someone who's resigned. It's remarkable.
It is remarkable. And the question is this too little, too late? This is not a man that's known for thinking before he speaks. He governs by Twitter. He lashes out on Twitter. But it took him 48 hours to condemn a really atrocious behavior, racism. And I think this is going to come back and bite Trump because the expectation from business leaders was for more. And we saw Ken Frazier, that Merck chief executive, saying he's resigning from the Manufacturing Council if Trump doesn't do something about this.
I just wonder, I suppose, for these people in business, reputation is so important. And if they feel that there's any possible compromise to that, they're going to kind of take a big step back.
And we've already seen that with the Paris Climate Agreement, with leading leaders like Elon Musk of Tesla distancing themselves from Trump because of the decisions he's made.
I just wonder sometimes if they want to have a positive influence, maybe can they do more good by actually staying close to the president and feeding in their thoughts? Or I suppose it's one of those dilemmas for them, isn't it?
It is an interesting dilemma, but it is all about brand reputation and whether you want to be associated with certain behaviour.
You've got, how do you stay close to such a president that is basically speaking his mind all the time? You've got Goldman Sachs, Apple, all of them describing how they are not happy with the president's actions, and yet that's what just shocks me, that the president then had to tweet that comment about Merck, about the prices.
Yes.
He still lashed out.
Which seems very petty if you think this is the leader of the world's leading superpower.
Now, on to the Japan Times, which yes. I know, Ben, you were covering this story.
We were talking about
news from Japan, finally.
Yeah, welcome.
Finally.
Yeah, finally, exactly. Finally. Their annual growth rate, 4%. But they've still got all these underlying problems within the economy, haven't they? The ageing population, the massive debt pile, and that's what they really need to tackle long term.
It will be good news for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, however, because he's had 4 years of Abenomics, that catch-all phrase that really encompasses spending to kickstart the Japanese economy. Because as we know, the economy has stagnated since the 1980s when we had the property and stock market bubble. The big problem, as you say, is an aging population and this aversion to immigration, because they need to kickstart the economy. For that, they need a younger population, they need spending. But things are finally looking up for Japan. And also, what's interesting, this is a market that's been out of favor with investors seemingly forever. But if you look at the performance of the topics, Japan's benchmark index, it's outperformed the S&P 500, the US market, which has been a rip-roaring market. It's also outperformed the FTSE 100 by 4 times as much. So things are finally looking up.
And of course, they've got the Olympics in 2020. It costs a lot to host the Olympics, but of course, it draws in a lot of money, doesn't it?
The question really is if this can continue up into the Olympics.
Now, of course, on the 14th, we marked the 2-month anniversary of the absolute tragedy at Grenfell Tower. The New York Times has a really interesting piece in this, the tale of two boroughs almost. I know that that's been used, that tale of two cities has been used so much, but this is talking about South Kensington and North Kensington and how the concerns of the residents of South Kensington, the revving of very expensive super Uber duper cars, I don't even know how to describe them, is listened to by the council, and yet the desperate concerns of the North Kensington residents were simply not.
It is really appalling. If you hear some of these complaints that were coming from South Kensington, such as neighbours building underground cinemas and swimming pools, Ferraris, drag racing in the streets, compared to the complaints around the Grenfell Tower, the fact that the fire extinguishers were outdated, that there wasn't a community fire alarm, and what the Grenfell Tower has really become is a symbol of inequality, this inequality that we've seen in the last few years as government spending has been cut, and it really is the poor that have felt it the hardest.
And what's interesting, I mean, here it is on the front page of the New York Times, because the danger is with these things is that they're front and centre of the news agenda for a few days, a few weeks, and then kind of attention moves on, the agenda moves on. But actually, the fact, it's still being discussed, and it's on the front page of an international paper, the attention's still very much on it.
That's right.
Should we move on to what's this one? The Guardian, and Uber trying to sweeten things with its drivers. We can leave tips.
Well, that's interesting. So this is a practice that's been happening in the US for some time, but now UK users can leave tips, and also Uber drivers can overcharge if they are left waiting for passengers. It is interesting because we see the rise of these gig economy companies like Uber, like Deliveroo, and it's all about flexibility. People want that flexibility that these companies offer, but then there's the danger that workers could be exploited.
But aren't Uber, are they not missing the point here? Because many of their workers are concerned over workers' rights, and talking about something like, leaving tips, that kind of, it dodges the issue that is at the centre of many of these people's concerns.
Some people have dubbed this as a bit of a cynical PR trick, because the real issue here is workers' rights, the excessive long hours that Uber drivers have to work, and the minimum wages that they pay. So it's interesting to see how this will pan out.
And a warning to anyone who does use Uber that the cancellation period is being shortened. So it used to be up to 5 minutes you could cancel if you changed your mind or your plans changed. That now goes down to 2 minutes. If you cancel after 2 minutes, then I think you pay a fee, don't you? Pay a penalty fee.
Yeah, so that period of grace has shrunk down.
I can see why they do that, because if the driver started moving towards you and then you cancel, it's not really fair, is it?
20 pence for waiting times a minute as well. Now, on to silencing Big Ben. Not Ben Bland, of course not Ben Bland. There's been a huge backlash over the fact that Big Ben we will not hear its chimes for 4 years. I'm quite surprised by just how angry some people are.
Yes, because as this article points out, for 157 years, which is a remarkable amount of time, Big Ben really hasn't been silenced, even throughout the Second World War. Now, the reason why they've introduced this is for the health and safety of the workers working on this maintenance project. It's got to do with their hearing, but of course this is the most photographed landmark in Britain. That's every tourist who comes to London wants that mandatory selfie with Big Ben. They could get the selfie, although a few of the faces will be covered with construction work, but they're not going to hear the sound, those bongs.
It's not quite the same, is it? I mean, someone was saying, one of the MPs was saying, it's so important to the mental well-being of the nation. Maybe that's overstretching it slightly, especially for anyone watching outside London. But questioning why it couldn't ring out from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the building work's finished for the day, which may be a fair point. But, there we are. Work must be done. these things are needed.
£29 million renovation project of all of this. So just for those of you who enjoy the facts and figures. Maike Currie, it's been an absolute
really nice
pleasure from
Thanks very
Fidelity
much.
Personal Investment. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for this paper review. Ben, thank you.
My pleasure. Time for both of us to fall silent now. We'll be back with more news at the top of the hour. See you then.
Bye-bye.